Submission is an area of life that we all struggle with and doesn't come easy for us. And it's interesting that as I write about submission, I talk about the fact that we need umpires in our lives. And why do I say that? Because submission is not something that we want to do ourselves, right? We don't want to submit. We want it to be about us, especially when we are young. We want our ideas, our thoughts, our time, our agenda to matter, and submitting that to somebody else, whether it's early in life, in parents, with coaches, as we get older, submitting to maybe a leader or a boss, becomes extremely difficult. And so as I talk about submission, I always talk about the fact that we need to recruit umpires in our life. So in the game of cricket or in the game of football, you will have a referee or an umpire that basically says to you, hey, this is the game. I am going to call the game. I am responsible, and for what I say matters, and you have to submit to that authority. You think about being a police officer. There are times that a lot of people struggle to the authority of a police officer, and it's our responsibility to be able to submit to those who are in authority, and to also seek out and find people who are going to hold us accountable, right? And I want to give you a couple of stories that happened to me. The first one was, in 1990, I just started work. It was about 2-3 years after I had started work in America, and I worked for this boss. He was an absolute terror. I can remember people all around me were quitting. And they just could not take it with this guy. And I was getting closer and closer to the point where I wasn't able to handle it myself. I remember calling my mother. It was a long-distance phone call. I called my mother and I basically said, hey, you know what? This guy isn't even qualified to shine my shoes, but, he is just beating me up, and I don't know how much more of this I can take. What I thought my mother was going to do was to take my side because, she was my biggest fan. I was her oldest son. I had set this thing up for her to say, hey, I feel your pain. She did say that, but she asked me to go back and to submit to that situation, to submit to that person. And sure enough, I had to go back and do that, and it was a lesson of being able to submit my agenda, how I thought about the situation, how qualified I thought I was, to a person who was in authority over me. But I can tell you that about a year later, I had finished working for this boss. I had moved on, and my boss came back to me. The chief operating officer of the company came back to me and said, "Hey, Sam, I want you to go back and work for this same person." This was about a year and a half later. And I thought about it, and I said to him, "Mark," I remember my boss's name. His name was Mark. I said to him, "Mark, a good Marine goes through boot camp only once. And I am not going to go back to that particular situation," because here was a lesson, right? On one hand, there was a time to be able to submit, and so that I could learn from it, I could grow from it, I could be stretched from actually submitting to that particular situation. But I can also tell you that there is a time when you have to stand up for yourself and say, guess what? The things that I needed to learn, I have already learned, and I'm not going to subject myself to this situation one more time. So this idea of submission is something that we really need to make sure that on one hand we embrace with humility, but to always watch for somebody who is going to try to take advantage of us, right? So we want all of the positives of submitting to a situation, submitting to a leader, so that, God can actually use that place to refine us, right? So that we can become more than what we have been. And sometimes that comes from having to submit. But I will tell you, there is an unhealthy part of being submissive, and I want to make sure that you have the discernment, that you exercise discernment not to get into those situations.